welcome to another Vital Moments podcast. I was about to say good morning, but I suppose whenever you're listening to this, it could not be morning. It could be evening, it could be middle of the night, but welcome. And I'm here with our lead pastor, Ron. How are you this morning, Monday?
Pretty good.
Yeah?
Pretty good. I'm kind of a bachelor for a couple of days. Desiree's gone away with a friend.
Whoa. Okay.
So I'm gonna be a bachelor.
Okay, so for anyone listening, make sure Ron's been eating over the next couple days. If you've got to drop off to him or invite him over for dinner, seems to be a struggle sometimes.
Listen, I can cook eggs, okay?
Good,
all right?
Good.
I can cook eggs.
You survive off of that.
I know. That's great. Spoiled. My wife, Desiree, is a phenomenal cook, so I definitely am spoiled by her. And yes, so when she goes away, I literally said to her this morning, this is Monday when we're recording this. I said, what am I going to do tonight? And she laughs. I was kind of kidding, so I can fend for myself.
Yeah, you'll be just fine.
I will.
Yeah. Well, you were on fire this weekend with this conversation as we're continuing in this Exodus and Jesus or Exodus to Jesus. We've been having this debate behind the scenes on where we're landing. You kind of went Exodus to Jesus yesterday.
Oh, I did.
Nonetheless, that's what you said. Either way, I think they say kind of the same thing. There's this idea.
They do. I think they say the same
overarching
thing. Overarching. Yeah. Yeah, because the Exodus story is a foreshadowing of Jesus, right? It's, everything that the story is about is linked to what Jesus ultimately does.
Right.
To set us free from our enslavement to sin, to freedom, right? And so I think whether you say it's Exodus Jesus or Exodus to Jesus, it goes Exodus to Jesus, to me, to you, to us.
Yeah.
Right. So anyway.
Yeah. It continues to move forward. And it's just so crazy. This is why, well, not why, there's so many reasons why the Bible is so cool.
Yeah.
So cool.
Amy, let me ask you, what was one thing yesterday that stuck out to you? I'm going to flip the script here. You're the host. What is one thing that, no, seriously, like, because I think there's stuff that highlights for people, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so much of actually, like, I could feel your story as you were sharing that and acknowledging that in my own life. Because again, I am part of the teaching team. So I previewed your talk earlier this week and been thinking a lot about it and about, those moments that can sort of shape our thinking and all these things. And then, so it comes to a point where he has to like reshape that because that's not what defines us, but he uses it and redeems it. And I've been thinking a lot about the idea of the light shining into the darkness. Darkness has not overcome it. That piece in John chapter 1, describing Jesus and how, he shines a light on our shame, not to make us ashamed, but in order to bring healing to us. You don't have to hide anymore. And so how you sort of laid that out on like, Moses started trying to step into this on his own in his own strength at 40. And then at 80, he was actually ready and that noticing. And so for me, a lot of my story is similar on ended up sort of giving up on some dreams and ideas and things that had been spoken over me. And then over probably the last 4 years, watching God reshape that and use those experiences, but to cause me to rely more on him. And trust him. So,
I think the importance of the conversation from Sunday was recognizing that God had spoken to Moses through the bush to go back to Egypt, right? And the 40 years that he was in the wilderness is not a time of loss. It's a time of preparation. So there are things that were happening in Moses' life that were preparing him. One might have been necessary steps of humility. Maybe they're at 40 when he takes things into his own hands. There's a sense of self-assured cockiness or arrogance, but in the wilderness, there was a breaking down of that in his life, right? And I think there are moments, Amy, like you and I have talked about, your journey where words were spoken over you in the past, and you wondered, would it ever come to be? And the reality is that we often think that when these things come into our life, well, it's going to happen tomorrow. It's going to happen the next day. We're so used to the instant, the right away moments. And the truth is that it's the arc of our lives.
Yeah.
And it's the anticipation of those moments when God will orchestrate, when God will design, when God will put it in his timing to bring those things that were spoken to the forefront. And
yeah,
I mean, you know, that's why we have to be so careful with our expectations of speaking, even into young people, where we see God's hand on their lives. There's an unnecessary pressure that they have to fulfill what they've heard. And it's really, it's a season of waiting. It's a season of forming. It's a season of anticipation and not forcing it. Moses, in the incident that we looked at on Sunday, he forced what he knew he was supposed to do, what he probably like he was called to do. He must have known that, but yet he tried to force it. And then he flees to the wilderness, right? Then he has this crazy burning bush experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we should probably talk about shame too.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause you tied, you really brought that whole piece home for us on that connection between doing it on our own. And I kind of actually want to start with, is shame just bad?
Yeah. I mean, depends on how you, it's a good question. How you look at this, right?
Yeah.
Shame that is the consistent loop or the dominant narrative that we experience in our lives is bad because it begins to make us believe that we are too flawed, that we're too broken. Shame unkept will be isolating. There's an isolating factor to it. Shame will tell you that this thing that has happened to you or the thing that you have done, you're the only one, right? And so shame in and of itself is not good for us because it begins to shape our identity, right? It begins to shape how we see ourselves. It begins to shape the narrative the story that Moses says to God, who am I to go back, right? Who am I to go and lead your people out of Egypt? And I think the shame story for Moses had really shaped how he saw himself. Like my past failures, I killed somebody, I murdered somebody. But I also think there's an element of understanding that shame can be the alarm of our soul that drives us back to the Father and embracing the story that the Father tells us. Think about the prodigal son. He wants his inheritance. In Luke 15, he wants his inheritance. Basically, he's telling his father that he wants him dead. I view you as dead. And then he goes off in this reckless living. And then he finds himself in the muck and mire of life. And in the midst of that shame, it drove him back to the Father. It awakened him to the reality of what he has done and the beauty of the Father's embrace. So I think when you look at shame from a perspective of the alarm bell of the heart, or like I see alarm, and my alarm goes off at 5:30 every morning, and quite frankly, I probably don't even have to set it because I wake up before it. But it's that thing that goes off that wakes us up to the reality of where we are in our lives. And so shame, I would say, shame is not a good thing,
right?
Because too many people wallow in the story that they tell themselves of past failures, right?
Yeah, and yet how God can use it as such a redeeming thing. It's just, I mean, it's a beauty too of this whole book in the Bible, especially when we read Old Testament, how many stories God redeems, even though the mess is there and all those things. And I couldn't help but think back to the Garden of Eden and that moment when Adam and Eve sinned and they
Yeah.
fell short of what God had for them. They chose to do it in their own. And
Yeah.
that shame all of a sudden of like, it's they're feeling exposed and naked and they hide and they're afraid of God.
Yeah.
And so I know that some of the Connect groups this week will be discussing the effect of shame on our relationship with God. And you kind of unpack that. It can isolate us. It can make us feel alone.
Yeah.
And then God calls them out. He's like, who told you that? Who set that into motion in your mind that you were to be shameful of this?
Yeah.
And in their own efforts, they try to cover up and hide. He's like, I've got this, and provides for them in that moment.
Yeah.
And I think, for me, again, it comes back to that idea of allowing Jesus to shine a light on our shame, not to make us feel ashamed, but in order to bring healing and hope. And so it's just a beautiful story of how God can redeem even our worst hurts.
And like, you think about the story, Amy. You think about how God gets Moses' attention in the bush.
Mm-hmm.
And he goes, and it says he looked and he behold. You know what I mean? Like he fixated on the bush, and then God. And one of the things that struck me about this interaction between God and Moses in the bush was God did not view Moses through his past. He viewed him through his future.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And we in our shame are trapped by our past mistakes and our past sin, our past failures. We live in the shame of the narrative we tell ourselves. I'm not smart enough. I'm not educated enough. I'm not eloquent enough. I mean, Moses would ultimately get to a place where he said, I'm not even able to speak, right? With God when he has this interaction. But I love the story in Exodus. I was doing some study last night for this coming week, which we're going to be looking at the plagues, the 10 plagues. I was doing some stuff last night, and what was revealed as I was doing my studying was that this story is the greatest moment of God revealing who he is, Yahweh. I am, the big I am statement, right? And then he promises to Moses, I am with you, right? And so the realization is that we may have a narrative that we tell ourselves, but God has a greater narrative for our lives.
Right.
And I think our story needs to be captured in the narrative of God's story, not in the shame of the past or things that maybe have done to us. I mean, man, Amy, second service, and Poplar Hill in particular, there was a moment when I listed off things that we might be shamed for, and I hit it in the other service. I hit it in the video. You may have been sexually abused, and you believe the narrative, the shame that you're not lovable because you're so broken.
Right.
And boy, I don't know what it was in the second service, but that hit in the room. And obviously the uniqueness of multiple services can have that effect, but and some need to be set free from that, right? Yeah.
And the reality kind of is like, we aren't enough and we would fall short, but it's the beauty of the power of the Holy Spirit at work. I know even yesterday, one of my Connect group members, because we meet on Sunday afternoon, so we missed the podcast, they just catch up later, but was just sharing a moment of her experiencing where she went, that wasn't me. Like, I fully know that wasn't me, and how God has used just their story in this moment of there's some pain and some hurt and some struggle there, but how it's caused them to grow their reach so much deeper in who he is. And now it's outflowing in this really beautiful way. And so just the way that God works so intricately to break us free of our shame and bring us to that full reliance on him. And like, I mean, 2 years ago, we declared boldly dependent. And then that fruit just comes forth as, like you said, we behold him, we fix our eyes on him. We take our eyes off of ourselves, off of our shame, off of that internalizing, rhetoric and story that we play in our head, and we fix our eyes on him, and it just starts naturally. And you stepped into that, the good works piece. That he is prepared in advance for us to do. So this story of redemption and bringing us out of our shame in order to do good works that he has already set into motion. We don't have to make happen in our own efforts.
Right.
And so coming out of this, I would love for you to, I'll see if I have something else quick right now, but help us to understand, okay, what do we do with this now? What are practical steps for us to step out of that shame and to start allowing God to bring healing and hope and a future to even the darkest parts of who we are?
Okay, now I'm hopping. I'm ready. Okay, two things. Actually, first thing is this, Romans chapter 12, verse 2. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind. Okay? That by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. Okay? There is a process of renewing our minds, which means renewing a new story, finding a new story. Galatians 5 talks about walking in the Spirit. So for a follower of Jesus, there is a power that is available to us in the renewal of our minds. We renew our minds by reading scripture, by listening to maybe some worship music, by prayer, because we're trying to create new pathways of truth in our minds. So it's that renewal. It's the ongoing renewal. But the second thing that struck me yesterday, somebody moved the book of James in my Bible. I don't know where it went. I'm kidding. So here's the other thing. Someone came to me and confessed something on Sunday. And I want you to think about this. Jesus is the healer, right? Jesus we can find forgiveness in Jesus, right? We can understand that. But James talks about if we confess our sin to each other, there's what? There's also a healing, right? There's an element of understanding the healing that he can bring in our lives. Therefore, confess your sins to one another and pray for one another that you may be healed. The prayer of a righteous person has greater power as it is working. So the more you keep the story of shame a secret, the more it has a hold on you. We can experience the cleansing power of Jesus, forgiveness of sin, the forgiveness that's available to us through Christ. So there's forgiveness, full expression of healing. Flowing out of that is the relational dynamic that we have with each other. So when this person was talking to me after the service, it dawned on me as I was listening to him confess the shame that he felt about actions from the past. I was like, this is the power of the moment. This is the power of the church. This person said, I've never told anybody this, and I have lived with this shame. And I looked at him and I said, this is your healing moment. This is your moment of healing. And then we prayed together. So forgiveness comes from Jesus. Greater healing power of that forgiveness becomes a reality when we speak it out loud. And I admire the person that spoke to me after the service yesterday in Poplar Hill. The courage it took to step into that moment and confess something that he had done in the past, that the shame story had a grip on him. You could see it in his face. And it was a beautiful moment just to sit, and I prayed with him. And so the two things I would say, a very practical way, is the renewing of our minds. And that's a journey. That's a process, right? And that happens by scripture. That happens by prayer, by meditating on the things of God, walking in the Spirit, those elements of the Christian faith and discipleship. But also, if you truly want to know the healing power of faith, is the dynamic of the one another factor. And that is, who do you trust that won't judge you, that when you confess it will put their arm around you and just be in that moment with you? And so those two things I would say right off the hop, and that would break
Yeah.
the cycle of shame for
Yeah.
people.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think too, if you're hearing this and you're wanting to take those next steps, we have really great resources available, even for that renewal of the mind. We did a prayer series back in February that you can look up on our YouTube and podcasts and things like that. And we did a Practicing the Way series as well. So it walks you through some of these things and steps on how can I renew my mind? What does that look like? And these are just really practical spiritual disciplines that help us towards that trajectory. And also, I mean, a lot of our Connect groups are listening to this. I want to encourage and exhort Connect group leaders to maybe make room in your groups this week for, is there anything anyone wants to talk about and confess, and create that safe space in that room where you can pray for one another and find healing and hope. And, those that are listening, they're going to participate in Connect group. Like, maybe this could be a moment where you can open up and trust your group, or just, praying that you'd have the boldness to do that. And if you're looking for a Connect group, we actually just revamped our Connect group page on their website. So if you're just interested or want more information, you can fill that out. And there's two options there: get more information, or I'd like to look at what does it look like to be a part of a group, because it is a really, really essential piece to what we do here and journeying together on this. So we ran a little on, but is there any final thought you want to drop here? I mean, I think those practical steps are really fantastic. And
I want to say this. I believe that we as followers of Jesus have to get better at creating space for confession. I really do. You said it about in Connect groups and so on. It is, it's risky, and maybe you've been hurt in the past by a moment like this. But I honestly, maybe, Amy, the part that will emerge out of this for people is a courageous, bold, faith-filled step to sit with someone and to confess and to speak it out loud and to allow someone to love you through it. And you'd be wise about it, I should say too, because you got to pick the right person. So I feel like I'm giving all the disclaimers about this, because someone goes and does it and it backfires and they say, well, on the podcast you said, and I'm like, yeah,
that's right. Being wise about it. And even, if you're the person receiving that confession, understanding that that is really sacred ground that you're on with that person, and it's not to fix it, but to, what does it look like to just hold space and love them, and even thank them so much for sharing that and trusting you with that. It's a pretty special piece to be part of. Okay, well, this was great, and we're looking forward to next one. And if you want to go further, don't forget we have a resource for that Monday to Friday you can walk through this story again and some further thoughts that you may have to reflect on it and allow it to reshape and reform your thinking. So you can find that on our resources page on the website under next steps. And again, thank you so much for listening and checking this out. Appreciate all you guys. Thanks, Ron.
Thanks, Amy.